This is Chapter 1, History and Current Issues of Early Childhood Education. So the first thing that you are going to do is tell me a little bit about your background and your experience with early childhood education. This is in the discussion for this week, so you just go ahead and do that discussion and you'll answer all these questions here. But I'll give you a little bit about me. I did not go to preschool. I went from being at home to kindergarten, half-day kindergarten. I don't know that that made a difference in my life. My mom was a preschool teacher later on. She was an elementary school teacher before that. So I think we did a lot of preschool stuff at home, even though I didn't go to preschool. When I had my kids, I had a full-time job where I traveled a lot and decided that that wasn't going to work anymore. And so my job was in marketing and English. And I didn't have really any background in early childhood education. My children went to a great morning program. It was both drop-in and preschool. And I decided if they were going to go to school, once both of them were old enough, they were going to go to school, maybe that would work with my schedule pretty well. So I called up the director and said, hey, would you be interested in, could I be an intern? I'm interested in this, but I don't really want to work there. And she said, well, we don't do interns. You can work in the toddler room or you can work in little big kids, which was like 2s and 3s. And I thought, okay, well, what the heck? So I had no educational background in education or early childhood, child development, nothing. And so at the same time that I started working in the mornings, I started going to Parkland and I completed my 6 hours so I could be a head teacher by the end of my first semester working. And then I took over a four-year-old class, which was fantastic. And then I thought, well, I might as well go ahead and get my director qualification while I'm here. So I got director qualified. 2 years later, I became the director. And I loved working with kids. And being a director was its own thing. And I realized what I really liked to do was teach teachers. So I went and got my master's at University of Missouri. And I've been teaching at Parkland and at Millikan ever since. So I taught and directed for about 7 or 8 years. And that's kind of my background in early childhood education and childcare and child development. And my practice is based in Vygotskian theory. I love the social aspect of development that he talks about, but as you'll learn as we go through, we all use a lot of theories all the time. So there you go. What is early childhood? In this class in Illinois, we refer to early childhood as infancy through age 8, generally early childhood in public schools is through grade 3. That's when learning kind of changes from, it should, from a play-based experiential learning to a more academic focus. And there's some controversy about whether even in 3rd grade we should be focusing on academics so much. But anyway, early childhood education refers to a group setting deliberately intended to affect developmental changes in young children. Early childhood programs are group settings, and early childhood educators are people who work with young children. So early childhood education hasn't been around as a discipline for all that long, really. People have been talking about it and working in it in different ways, but it didn't become something that we really studied as a particular focus until maybe the 70s or 80s. So we didn't think of children necessarily at young children as a specific group to work with differently than we worked with older kids. And but even though it wasn't necessarily a focused discipline, people were thinking about young children and how young children learn and how young children develop and grow. Doctors, educators, psychologists, also philosophers and clergy were developing ideas and theories around how to work with young children, how young children develop and grow. There are four basic themes that we talk about in early childhood education, which are social reform, and that includes childcare and education reform. Childhood, we know that children are not little adults, that they react to things differently, they grow differently. And childhood looks at the dangers of childhood, abuse, neglect, issues of family and community. Transmission of values. We transmit values in the way that we work with young children, right? So we are, in many cases, as early childhood educators, teachers, children's first teachers, and children's first adults beyond their parents. So what we do means a lot to them. And then we're going to talk about the aspects of professionalism. This is a career. This is a professional endeavor. This is not babysitting. There's a lot of people out there that think that, and they're wrong. There's so much that goes into this. This is not any less a profession or career than, a lot of things out there. So we're going to quickly go through some of the folks who influenced early childhood education thinking, philosophies about how children learn and grow. And you'll see it's interesting to look at this as we go through. You're seeing a lot of white European males who were thinking about how children learn, how the brain works, how it develops, how physical development happens, how children think. And one of my classes, interestingly, said it's really interesting that probably the best experts on early childhood development were the moms, the people who were actually taking care of the children, but they didn't have time to think up these great theories because they were too busy taking care of the children. So it's an interesting thing to have theories provided by these fellows who may not have had as much actual life experience with young children, but probably did some research and observation. So Luther was a German lawyer and monk who thought all people should be able to read the Bible. And so because he urged parents to educate their children and teach them to read, he is an influence in how we work with young children. Comenius was a Czech educator who wrote the first picture book for children. Like, oh, you know what? Reread these books that have words in them, but children don't understand that yet. What if I put pictures in a book? Wow, wouldn't kids enjoy that? Locke is a philosopher, founder of educational philosophy, who believed that children are blank slates, tabula rasa, and the effect of the environment. The environment has an effect on learning, and he first talked about the sensory approach to learning. So hands-on, doing things out in the world is how you learn things. Rousseau was a French writer and philosopher who believed that children are naturally good, as do I. Education is for learning, not just work, like learning about the world around you, not just preparing you for some career or the work that you're going to do. That children learn by doing and are different from adults, and that there are distinct phases of development. And you'll see how that all trickles down to other philosophers and theorists later on. All right. Pestalozzi was a Swiss educator who focused on teaching basic skills, caring and educating, integrated the curriculum, developing the whole child, and teaching children in groups. So Pestalozzi's first maybe really important groundbreaking thing was, hey, if we put a bunch of kids together, we can teach them all at once. And they also teach each other. Froebel was a German, and he developed kindergarten, based through, you can see there's overlap in when these people were working. So word was spreading around the world about how to work with young children. Froebel thought, a garden of children, a kindergarten, will help them work together and understand, develop socially. And he developed an interesting educational toy called the Froebel Gifts, which are a very precisely made architectural group of balls, blocks, cubes, there's a heavily prescribed way of playing with them. And he was an influence on Montessori. You've probably heard of Montessori. If you haven't heard of any of these folks before, when we get to Montessori, you'll probably know her. Rudolf Steiner was another German who founded the Waldorf School. If you're not familiar with Waldorf School, it's a school that has a very specific program, a very specific way of working with children, a very specific way of decorating classrooms and having toys. And so Rudolf Steiner founded Waldorf, and he felt that there were important periods of development, which we'll hear about later on. And then we, of course, had Maria Montessori, the first female physician in Italy. She had a full day center for ages 2 to 5, and she focused on independence, discipline, and practical skills. One reason was because she took orphans from the street and trained them to work in wealthy people's homes. So to be workers, she was training them to be workers. That's why we hear about washing socks, washing glasses, doing practical life skills. Another reason is because those are ways that children take on roles and learn to do things. So we'll talk about that as we go through. The Macmillan sisters had the first open air nursery school in Deptford, London. What they saw were all these children who were on the streets because their parents were working in factories. And so what they did was they opened this preschool, nursery school in the middle of London. And it was, the sides were open. And they invited children to come in and spend the day because the kids didn't have anything else to do. They were just wandering the streets. They gave them fresh air. They let them take naps. They fed them. They bathed them. So it was really the first kind of daycare for working parents. And that was in 1910. And here we are in 2021, and we still don't have really a great system that really works for everyone. But the Macmillan sisters are sort of pioneers in that. All right, so once we get to the United States of America, what we have happening in colonial times is that children are learning to read for religious purposes. Back in the 1500s, Luther was talking about we all need to learn to read the Bible. Still talking about that in the 1700s in the United States of America. Children were taught at home. They weren't sent to school at that time. If they did, it was a small school and it was boys only, and girls learned practical skills at home. They might have learned to read, they might not have learned to read, but they were working on sewing and cooking and baking and all that stuff. Now, an interesting thing that you need to know is that this was basically white people in America that we're talking about at that time. Before the Civil War, there was little education for Black children. There were Sabbath schools, which was school that took place on Sundays when people had the day off, because we're talking about during that time in the southern states of the United States, right? There were enslaved people who worked all the time. Anytime that they had off was time that they spent resting, whatever. It was not time that they could spend doing other things. So Sabbath schools and midnight schools, these were schools that took place at night, were places where children of color could get religious training, including literacy. It's very interesting to read about Sabbath schools and midnight schools. At some point, there were laws against teaching enslaved people to read. Because why? Because they didn't want enslaved people to know what was going on in the world. And so it might cause enslaved people to revolt. And so there were these secretive midnight schools where people who could read taught other people to read. And then post-Civil War, schools and colleges were established for and by Blacks and former enslaved people. Okay, so John Dewey is a name that you know if you know anything about education. He lived from 1858 to 1952. And a lot of what we do in education today is based on Dewey's thinking and Dewey's ideas that children are valuable and childhood is important, that we shouldn't necessarily be just throwing kids to work or leaving them alone. We need to really work with them during that period on their development. One thing that John Dewey also was very famous for was that education prepares students to become citizens, to participate in democracy. He was, I think a lot of times we think about education now as creating workers, and Dewey's focus was creating citizens. So it wasn't just about the training you needed to get the job that you wanted, it was about the training, the experiences that you needed to be an important contributing member of society. So if you ever have a chance, just read Experience in Education. It's a short little book and it's full of really interesting ideas. Dewey sort of, he started the progressive movement in education, which changed from the traditional way of thinking about school. So traditionally, school was to pass on information and skills from one generation to another. Teachers communicated the knowledge and skills and enforced the rules. And you wanted to create this sort of finished product of a student who knew these things and was able to do these things. Dewey flipped that a little bit and talked about expression and cultivation of individuality, free activity, learning through experience, meaningful experiences. He believed that all education comes from experiences, but not all experiences are educational. So experiences need to promote students' interest in learning and influence later experiences. You can think about this way. When we talk about early childhood education, we often do themes. And the way that we think about themes is as experiences. So we're experiencing an apple in a variety of ways. We're eating apples. We're going to an apple orchard. We're seeing if apples sink or float. So we're experiencing apples in a variety of ways. That's what we want to do. And we want to make sure it's educational experiences and not just experiences that are fun. They should be fun, but they also need to be teaching something. So educators need to be able to judge what's going on in the minds of learners. So educators need to have a base knowledge of child development, how children are processing new ideas and experiences. They need to know how to use physical and social surroundings to contribute to worthwhile experiences. So how do I leverage the things around me to make this an interesting and educational experience for children? How to adapt objective conditions to different types of learners, right? So we know there are children who learn differently. How do I get this concept through into the brains of somebody who only learns by touching things or who learns primarily by touching things? Somebody who learns primarily by dancing or singing or writing things down. What's the best way for me to pass on this concept to all different types of learners? And how experiences outside of an individual give rise to experience. So what is different from, and this is the way Dewey thought of it, a slum child versus a rich child. What are the outside experiences that make learning difficult or easier for children who have more resources and children who have fewer resources? So a couple more early childhood heroes, if you will, sheroes. We have Patty Smith Hill, Lucy Sprague Mitchell, and Abigail Elliott. All of these women were part of both Patty Smith Hill and Lucy Sprague Mitchell came out of the progressive movement in the United States. And Abigail Elliott brought nursery school movement to the United States. She worked with the Macmillan sisters. So some of them were teachers, some of them were social workers, and they saw schools, early childhood, as both important to society as a whole and important to the development of young children. Education and care in those early years help children develop. Basically, paying attention to young children will help them develop better, was kind of their thinking. So we'll learn more about these ladies next week in class. And just a little bit about the field. So starting in the 20s and 30s in the United States, we started having nursery schools. And it was for middle and upper class people and some working families, but they didn't um, really help out poor families very much. It was so ladies could not necessarily have a nanny at home. They could put their children somewhere and go and do whatever they needed to do. Um, and it was an educational endeavor for young children. It was a child-centered approach and focused on active learning and social cooperation. So they realized that it's important for children to have interaction with their peers in order to learn how to develop relationships and navigate socially. Kindergarten started again with Froebel, and kindergarten means Garden of Children, in Germany. And then the first public US kindergarten was in 1873, which was after the Civil War. Starting in the 70s, there was a more academic shift in kindergarten. Like I said, the kindergarten that I went to in the early 70s was very much like you would think of preschool now. It was half day. It was very experiential, play based. You know, we were there a half a day. We took a nap. We had dancing. We had chicks in our classroom. You know, we did exploratory things. And I had an old school kindergarten teacher, but even then, it was much more about developing the ability to be in a classroom with other children, to work together, to work with a teacher, and to be away from your parents, and not so much focus on ABCs, one, two, threes, writing your name, all of that stuff, reading. You didn't have to, you know, be able to read to get out of kindergarten when I was a kid. And then in the 90s, the developmentally appropriate practice was developed. So that is based on knowing a child's development. We're going to do things that are appropriate for that. So we're not assigning written homework to 4-year-olds. We're looking at what a child's developmental abilities are and doing activities and experiences that match that. So when I look back at some of my early school experiences, they were not developmentally appropriate. And when we look at classrooms today, we can see a lot of not developmentally appropriate things happening. We'll spend a whole week talking about developmentally appropriate practice. Now we have a standards and teacher-directed instruction on the rise, which is not developmentally appropriate. So most young children do not learn best from a teacher standing in front of the room reciting things and trying to drill information into their heads. It's not the way it works. Childcare is a separate and adjacent thing. So childcare, we talk about it as it relates to caring for young children. Institutionalized childcare could be things like daycare centers, Head Start. Head Start's a very specific kind, but childcare programs, that's childcare. It's not as focused on academics, but that's where it gets very muddy also in early childhood. Some childcare programs are very focused on teaching children concepts and ideas. And some are basically there for children to spend time while their parents go off and do other things. So as mothers joined the workforce, childcare became institutionalized, right? Prior to women really being in the workforce, there wasn't necessarily a need for childcare, and it could be provided by family members or churches or the neighbor, right? It was a much less formal situation. Now, during World War II, Kaiser Shipbuilders started the first business-based childcare program. So it was World War II. There was a shortage of workers. Women had to go to work to help build ships. What are we going to do with the kids? So Kaiser, which was a shipbuilding company, said, bring them here. If that will help you come work on our ships for us, we'll take care of your children. And they built an institutionalized childcare program, which went away, unfortunately, after World War II. But that was the beginning of having a structured childcare program in the United States. In 1965, Part of President Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty was providing child care for needy children in the United States of America. And that became what we now know as Head Start. In the United States, there are two federal child care programs. One is through the Department of Defense. If you work for the military, you are provided child care. And the second one is Head Start, which is for children who are low income preschoolers, and there's early Head Start as well for younger children. But that provides educational, social, medical, dental, nutritional, and mental health services to low income preschoolers. This is a model program that's been going on for now 56 years. And there are a lot of ways to understand what Head Start does. And there are a lot of opinions on whether Head Start is effective or not. They've studied children who've gone through Head Start. And what you'll always hear is that at third grade, the advantages that Head Start children have start to wear off. We don't see that they have the advanced educational development that they had in those first years, right? So it starts to wear off. An argument against that argument is that if you have children who are going from 3 to 5 through preschool with a program that provides all of this support, it provides educational, social, medical, dental, nutritional, and mental health services to low-income preschoolers and their families, and then you stop providing all those services, of course you're going to see fall off. You're going to see children not doing as well because they don't have all the supports that they had. There's a reason they got those supports. There's a reason they need those supports. And there's a reason those supports help. When you take them away, you're going to see that they cannot achieve the way they did before. So the argument that Head Start doesn't work is a false argument. All right. If we provided those supports continuing throughout their lives, we would see them continue to achieve. What happens is we take them away and children don't achieve like they did when they had those supports. So that's Head Start. And I'm going to put a little clip about Head Start in here for you to watch.
Lyndon Johnson announced the creation of Head Start, the government program designed to support low-income children and families. In our latest American Graduate Report, the NewsHour's April Brown has the story of how it's changed the lives of millions of children. That's part of a public media initiative funded by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
My salad grows in a garden.
In Lisette Steinwald's preschool class in Silver Spring, Maryland, the theme of what it takes to make a salad can be found in a variety of activities throughout the day, from reading to a little show and tell. The 4 and 5-year-olds she teaches in the Head Start program at Montgomery Knolls Elementary School spend 3.5 hours with her every day during the school year.
To make that number 2.
They're learning skills designed to ease the transition to kindergarten and are following in the footsteps of more than 30 million children who have gone through the program in the United States over the past 5 decades.
Head Start. A Head Start for poverty children.
Start got its start in the summer of 1965 as one salvo in President Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty. The early education program for low-income children supported their social, emotional, and physical needs and got them ready for elementary school. It drew high-profile supporters, including the president's wife, Lady Bird Johnson, and actor Gregory Peck.
Sadly, there are little children who are already headed for lives of frustration and misery. No one ever read them a story, taught them a nursery rhyme, showed them about colors, letters, and numbers. When they start school in the first grade, they'll be so far behind the others that they may never catch up.
In 1965, I was sitting on the porch of our little shotgun shack in Ames, Texas, with my mother, and a woman approached the house. She introduced herself and told my mother that she was representing a new program called Head Start.
Darren Walker's mother signed him up in the program's inaugural year, and he recently shared his story at a gathering of supporters and alumni from around the country hosted by the National Head Start Association.
Head Start changed my life. It allowed me to begin to imagine, to think about the world outside of my environment, and to think creatively about what my life might be.
Today, Walker is president of the Ford Foundation, the nation's second largest private philanthropic group, which is a funder of the NewsHour. In honor of Head Start's 50th anniversary, the organization is paying for new research on early brain development in an effort to improve outcomes. Walker says the foundation has come full circle since it supported research in the 1960s that led to the creation of Head Start in the first place.
What we were interested in at Ford was how we could, at scale across America, have a program that would create an educational revolution that would build a new social mobility escalator.
Isabel, do you have a toothbrush at home? No toothbrush.
The evidence is that it did some good when it was first introduced in very poor counties in the South. It's a different day.
Russ Whitehurst is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and has studied preschool programs extensively. He says even though it's an iconic program, evidence has revealed that Head Start's long-term outcomes are questionable. Whitehurst points to a 2010 study by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the 2014 follow-up report, which found almost no evidence of lasting impacts for Head Start children beyond the third grade.
They were not better readers. They were not doing math better. They did not have better social development. They did not have better health outcomes.
But the executive director of the National Head Start Association, Yasmina Vinci, says other factors should be taken into consideration when looking at that research.
Even when you're vaccinated, vaccinations do not last forever. You have to have a booster. And when our children don't go to schools that are well funded and well run and schools that are ready for them, they certainly do lose some of their advantage.
However, even the White House has acknowledged Head Start programs haven't always been pushed to do their best.
If a program wasn't providing kids with quality services, there was no incentive to improve. Under the new rules, programs are going to be regularly evaluated against a set of clear, high standards.
In 2011, President Barack Obama expanded accountability reform introduced by George W. Bush, and this year has appropriated about $8 billion for Head Start services. Still, Russ Whitehurst says the program isn't meeting the needs of many low-income families. He believes they would be better served with vouchers to choose their own preschools, especially since many Head Start centers are open just a few hours a day. Numbers proving Head Start success are hard to come by, but the program supporters say they know it's changed many lives.
We see the children who are now, graduating from high school and getting the scholarships, staying in school, not dropping out of high school.
I remember that I started to learn to read, and that I would read to my mother when I came home, and she was so proud of me. And it was one of those moments that I learned that when I did well in school, my mother would be proud of me.
Back in Maryland, Lisette Steinwald's class continues their exploration of salad, taste testing a variety of ingredients. Raise your hand if you like lettuce more than carrots, because we're going to count. All right, 1, 2, 3 and a half. And at the end of the day, Ziriana Barasarte is happy to share all the things she learned in her morning at Head Start.
I learned how to make salad, how to read, and how to sing songs.
Ziriana's mother, Zuela Barasarte, who is deaf, says the program has been good for her daughter.
She's learning a lot of vocabulary from the teacher. She's learning listening skills. She's learning how to share.
Just a few of the outcomes Head Start was originally created to nurture. I'm April Brown for the PBS NewsHour in Silver Spring, Maryland.
All right, so that was Head Start and a little bit for you to know about Head Start and the way the program works and whether it's successful or not. And I think we'll continue to study Head Start. And I think what will be interesting is to see, as our current administration has such a focus on childcare and early childhood development, how they put that into action. There's a push for universal preschool. What does that mean? Does that mean Head Start for everyone? Does that mean you're just going to have a year before kindergarten or 2 years before kindergarten that's run through public schools? How does that look? What does that mean? We don't know. We're all sort of in the woods here. I think the current administration, the Biden administration, has the best interest of children and families at heart when they put together these programs. They know, and we've seen over the past year, women have quit their jobs because they can't find any care for their children. They're not at school. Daycare centers shut down because of the pandemic. We've lost millions and millions of women in the workforce because of the pandemic and because of the lack of formalized childcare in the United States. There are a lot of different ways to do it. There are a lot of different programs out there, but it's not equitable. Not everybody has access to free or affordable quality childcare. And that's a problem. And we saw it this year and we continue to see it. And we know how important those first years are. Why aren't we doing more to help children and their families in those first years? My hope is that we will. Okay, so interdisciplinary influences. Like we said earlier, doctors, teachers, philosophers, psychologists, these are all people who are thinking and learning and teaching and developing theories about children. So medical people, Montessori, Sigmund Freud, Gassel, Benjamin Spock, T. Berry Brazelton, these are all doctors who thought about, how does child development work? What do we need to know about child development to understand children better and to help them? And then education, like we talked about the progressive education movement with Dewey. Reggio Emilia schools are another way that we are working with young children. Psychology, the child study movement, developmental and learning theories, and neuroscience, looking at how the brain actually works and processes information from childhood and through adulthood to understand better how we learn. And then the issues of today, the ethic of social reform. Education has the potential for significant social change and improvement. Like Dewey talked about, we are not just developing people and workers, we are developing citizens of our community. And how can we help them contribute to society? We need more quality, affordable, accessible childcare. I've been saying that since I started doing this work, and I hope that I don't have to continue saying it forever, but I assume I will. High quality means low teacher to child ratios, trained and experienced staff, adequate compensation, and a safe and stimulating environment. This is a profession, and this is an important profession, and it should be adequately compensated. Unfortunately, the way we've organized it in our country, we can't afford to charge people enough, to pay people enough to make the system work. So how do we do that differently? Well, we're learning right now. Hopefully, some of the plans that the Biden administration has put forward to inject some funds into childcare will come to fruition, and we'll see how maybe paying a little bit more into it will help everyone. Standards, measures to close the achievement gap have worked some and somewhat. We're still learning about that. We talked about developmentally appropriate practice, and we'll talk more about that for sure. And we know about the influence of family and the environment in this important time in childhood. What happens during the first 5 years has so much impact on the rest of your life. It's important to understand that. The transmission of values. So who and what shapes our children's values and behavior? Like I said before, we're not just making workers, we're making members of society. And then media and technology. How does that impact our children? How does watching the news impact children today? Social diversity. There are a lot of issues about and around social diversity that we're tackling right now in our society, and those trickle down to the smallest people among us. This is multicultural and bilingual education, immigration, inclusive education, gender issues. These are not things that only impact adults. This is little kids stuff as well. And then professionalism. This is a profession. We are professional educators. We're not just babysitters. We're not just daycare workers. We're professional educators. We are early childhood professionals, people who work with, impact, have a huge influence on young lives. And we need to remember that. And we need to also tell people that.